Charles A. Lindbergh, 1902 to 1974. May 1927. Charles A. Lindbergh, a 25-year-old Minnesota-born stunt flyer and airmail pilot, flies the monoplane Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris in 33 hours and 30 minutes. His completing first non-stop transatlantic solo flight makes him a celebrity around the globe. President Coolidge awards Lindbergh Distinguished Flying Cross and commissions him colonel in U.S. Army Air Corps Reserve. May 1929. Lindbergh marries Anne Morrow, the 23-year-old daughter of the U.S. ambassador to Mexico. June 1930. Charles A. Lindbergh, Jr., born to Charles and Anne Lindbergh in New Jersey. March through May 1932. Charles Jr. kidnapped from family's secluded new house on 435 acres of rural Hopewell, New Jersey. Some 10 weeks later, decomposing corpse of baby discovered by chance in nearby woods. September 1934 through March 1935, a poor German immigrant, carpenter, and ex-convict, Bruno R. Hauptmann, arrested in Bronx, New York for kidnap and murder of Lindbergh baby. 6-week trial in Flemington, New Jersey, characterized by press as trial of the century. Hauptmann found guilty and executed in electric chair in April 1936. April 1935, Anne Morrow Lindbergh publishes first book, North to the Orient, an account of her 1931 air adventures with Lindbergh. Becomes a top bestseller and receives the National Booksellers Award as the most distinguished nonfiction book of the year. December 1935 through December 1936. Seeking privacy, Lindberghs leave America with their 2 small children, and until their return in spring of 1939, reside mainly in a small village in Kent, England. At the invitation of U.S. military, Lindbergh travels to Germany to report on Nazi aircraft development, makes repeated visits for this purpose. Over the next 3 years, attends 1936 Berlin Olympics, where Hitler is in attendance, and later writes of Hitler to a friend, "He is undoubtedly a great man, and I believe he has done much for the German people." Anne Morrow Lindbergh accompanies her husband to Germany and afterwards writes critically of the strictly puritanical view at home that dictatorships are of necessity wrong, evil, unstable, and no good can come of them, combined with our funny paper view of Hitler as a clown, combined with the very strong, naturally Jewish propaganda in the Jewish-owned papers. October 1938. Service Cross of the German Eagle, a gold medallion with 4 small swastikas, conferred on foreigners for service to the Reich, presented to Lindbergh by order of the Fuhrer by Air Marshal Hermann Göring at American Embassy dinner in Berlin. Anne Morrow Lindbergh publishes a second account of her flying adventures, Listen, The Wind, a non-fiction bestseller despite her husband's growing unpopularity among American anti-fascists and the refusal by some Jewish booksellers to stock the book. April 1939. After Hitler invades Czechoslovakia, Lindbergh writes in his journal, "Much as I disapprove of many things Germany has done, I believe she has pursued the only consistent policy in Europe in recent years. At request of the Air Corps Chief General Hap Arnold, and with approval of President Roosevelt, who dislikes and distrusts him, goes on active duty as colonel in U.S. Army Air Corps." September 1939. In journal entries after Germany invades Poland on September 1st, Lindbergh notes the need to guard ourselves against attack by foreign armies and dilution by foreign races, and the infiltration of inferior blood. Aviation, he writes, is one of those priceless possessions which permit the white race to live at all in a pressing sea of yellow, black, and brown. Earlier in year, he notes of a private conversation with a high-ranking member of the Republican National Committee and the conservative newsman Fulton Lewis, Jr. "We are disturbed about the effect of the Jewish influence on our press, radio, and motion pictures. It is too bad because a few Jews of the right type are, I believe, an asset to any country." In April 1939 diary, omitted in 1970 from his published wartime journals, he writes, "There are too many Jews in places like New York already. A few Jews add strength and character to a country, but too many create chaos, and we are getting too many." In April 1940, speaking over the Columbia Broadcasting System, he says, "The only reason we are in danger of becoming involved in this war is because, There are powerful elements in America who desire us to take part. They represent a small minority of the American people, but they control much of the machinery and influence and propaganda. They seize every opportunity to push us closer to the edge. When Idaho Republican Senator William E. Borah encourages Lindbergh to run for president, Lindbergh says he prefers to take political positions as a private citizen. October 1940. In spring, America First Committee founded at Yale University Law School to oppose FDR's interventionist policies and promote American isolationism. In October, Lindbergh addresses a meeting of 3,000 at Yale, advocating that America recognize the new powers in Europe. Anne Morrow Lindbergh publishes third book, The Wave of the Future, a brief anti-interventionist tract subtitled A Confession of Faith, which arouses enormous controversy and immediately becomes top nonfiction bestseller, despite denunciation by the Secretary of the Interior, Howard Hicks, as the Bible of every American Nazi. April through August 1941, addresses 10,000 at America First Committee rally in Chicago, another 10,000 at New York rally, prompting his bitter enemy, Secretary Hicks, to call him the #1 United States Nazi fellow traveler. When Lindbergh writes to President Roosevelt complaining about Hicks' attacks on him, particularly for accepting the German medal, Hicks writes, "If Mr. Lindbergh feels like cringing when he is correctly referred to as a Knight of the German Eagle, why doesn't he send back the disgraceful decoration and be done with it?" Earlier, Lindbergh had declined returning the medal on grounds that it would constitute an unnecessary insult to the Nazi leadership. The President openly questions Lindbergh's loyalty, prompting Lindbergh to tender his resignation as Army Colonel to Roosevelt's Secretary of War. Hicks notes that while Lindbergh is swift in renouncing his Army commission, he remains adamant in refusing to return the medal received from Nazi Germany. In May, along with Senator Burton K. Wheeler of Montana, who is seated on the platform beside Anne Morrow Lindbergh, Lindbergh addresses 25,000 at America First rally at Madison Square Garden. His appearance greeted with cries from the audience of "Our next president!" and his speech, followed by a 4-minute ovation, speaks against American intervention in European war to large audience across the country throughout spring and summer. September through December 1941, delivers his "Who Are the War Agitators" radio speech to an America First rally in Des Moines on September 11th. Audience of 8,000 cheers when he names the Jewish race as among those most powerful and effective in pushing the U.S. for reasons which are not American toward involvement in the war, adds that we cannot blame them for looking out for what they believe to be their own interests, but we also must look out for ours. We cannot allow the national passions and prejudices of other peoples to lead our country to destruction. Des Moines' speech is attacked the next day by both Democrats and Republicans, but Senator Gerald P. Nye, a Republican from North Dakota and staunch America Firster, defends Lindbergh from critics and reiterates charge against the Jews, as do other supporters. December 10 address, scheduled for Boston America First rally, canceled by Lindbergh after Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And U.S. declaration of war on Japan, Germany, and Italy. Activities of America First Committee terminated by leadership and organization disbands. January through December 1942. Travels to Washington to seek reinstatement in Air Corps, but key Roosevelt cabinet members strongly oppose, as does much of the press, and Roosevelt says no. Repeated attempts to find position in the aviation industry also fail, despite a lucrative association during the late 20s and early 30s with transcontinental air transport, the Lindbergh Line, and as highly paid consultant with Pan American Airways. In spring, finally finds work with government approval as consultant to Ford's bomber development program outside Detroit at Willow Run, and family moves to Detroit suburb. The September afternoon, President Roosevelt visits Willow Run to inspect war production projects. Lindbergh makes it his business to be away. Participates in experiments at Mayo Clinic Aeromedical Laboratory to decrease physical damages of high-altitude flying. Later participates as test pilot in experiments with oxygen equipment at high altitudes. December 1942 through July 1943. Takes active role in training pilots for Navy Marine Corps Corsair fighter plane that he helps develop for United States aircraft in Connecticut. August 1943. Anne Morrow Lindbergh, now mother of 4 children, publishes The Steep Ascent, a novella about a dangerous flying adventure, her first published failure largely owing to hostility of reviewers and readers toward the pre-war politics of the Lindbergh family. January through September of 1944. After stint in Florida testing a variety of warplanes, including Boeing's new B-29 bomber, receives government permission to go to South Pacific to study Corsairs in action. Once there, begins to fly combat and bombing runs against Japanese targets from New Guinea base. At first as observer, but soon with great success as enthusiastic participant. Teaches pilots how to increase combat range by conserving fuel in flight. Having flown 50 missions and downed a Japanese fighter plane, returns to America in September to resume work with the United Aircraft's fighter program, and family moves from Michigan to Westport, Connecticut.